Okay, so I watched the Rob Ford documentary. It's available on Netflix. It's called Trainwreck, the Mayor of Mayhem. Which, I mean, it's kind of a little bit of a mean title, but okay. So it's only about 50 minutes long, and it pretty much covers the just a little bit talking about how Rob Ford was a city councilor, and then his run for mayor, and then all of the scandals, the videos, the incidences and stuff during his time as mayor, his run for mayor again, leading up to his eventual time in rehab, and then finding out that he has cancer until his passing. Right. So I would say it's a very fair documentary. Okay, it's not all just like, oh, Rob was a drug addict. No, they talked to people from, that were friends of his, that were on his staff, that did say really nice things about him. Like there was one guy that they talked to, and he talked about how Rob was the type of guy that would go out of his way to help people, even if they weren't in his ward when he was a counselor, and he was always about serving the people and stuff like that. And, but obviously the main thing that everybody was focused on while he was mayor was the fact that he was an addict. He had an alcohol addiction and a drug addiction. So they do focus on that. They talk to the reporters that, broke the stories. They talk about the fact that, he was getting his drugs from gun smugglers, for Christ's sakes. I remember when all those stories came out, but I didn't realize as bad as what it was. Like, he was dealing with some bad people. And the thing is that, like, at one point, when all of it first started coming out, one of his staffers was trying to tell him, like, you need to go to rehab. He said every conversation he had about him was you have to go to rehab. And Rob eventually fired him. And, like, he didn't have anybody telling him to go. It wasn't until he was running for mayor again, and another video came out, that he knew he was screwed and he had to go to rehab. But once he went to rehab, he started getting healthy, was working out, Unfortunately, by the time he got out, was doing better. Then he found out he had cancer, and he couldn't continue to run for mayor. So that's when Doug stepped in and continued on his campaign, and he ran for mayor, which he didn't win, right? But, like, obviously Doug Ford is not going to be happy about a documentary like this. Like, the whole Ford family is not going to be happy about a documentary about this. But frankly, it is what it is. And while the documentary could have been worse, because if they had decided to talk about anything other than Rob, if they talked about Doug, or they talked about the company, the scandals galore that they could have talked about. Hell, they didn't even mention the fact that Doug was a drug dealer. And it, might have been the cause of his brother's addiction. No, they painted Doug in a very good light in the documentary. They only touched on him like a couple of times. But, they showed him at the funeral saying all these nice things about his brother. They really and truly did not paint anybody in a bad light. They just focused on the main thing. And as you watch the documentary, I mean, I'm somebody that had to wean myself off of prescription opioids. I know what it's like to deal with addiction. It is not fun, okay? Especially when you're detoxing. I understand that it's an addiction. It's an illness. You cannot, help yourself. There's chemicals in these drugs that keep you addicted, Your body goes through withdrawal symptoms, and it's the most awful thing in the world. So I sympathize with Rob Ford having to deal with that. The problem is, though, is that people like Doug Ford continue to demonize and stigmatize drug addicts. Even though his brother dealt with that illness, he still, doesn't want safe injection sites, still makes it like the homeless are a blight on friggin' Toronto. Wants to throw them all in jail and stuff like that. And the thing is that, Doug, you cannot sit there and be mad at a documentary team for painting your brother in a bad light because he was a drug addict if you paint all drug addicts in a bad light. Like, you're part of the problem, you dumbass. So while I want to have sympathy and say, yeah, it must suck having to see a documentary about your brother who's passed on, because nobody likes to see someone continue to be, shown at their worst time in their life, right? You don't fucking help yourself. You don't help yourself by continuing to, shit on the homeless people in Ontario that are dealing with, a lot of them, drug addictions and alcohol addictions. So How do you expect us to have sympathy for your freaking brother when you don't have sympathy for anyone else in his situation? The only difference between the people that are homeless on the street dealing with addiction and your fucking brother is your brother happened to be born into a family that was well off. That's it. That's the only friggin' difference, dude. Is just the life that you're born into. That's it. Because one addict is just the same as another addict, except the addicts on the street don't have access easily to rehab. They don't have a support system. They don't have what your brother had. And even then, your brother didn't go until he was absolutely forced to hit rock bottom and knew he was going to win as mayor again. So that's the thing that you don't get. And I really wish that somebody would shake you by the shoulder and say, dude, you're not helping. You want people to look better. Like, honestly, you wanted to honor your brother, you would go out of your way to ensure that Ontario has proper help and support, mental health, housing, income programs, so on and so forth, to help pull people out of poverty and homelessness so that they would have proper support systems to overcome their drug and alcohol addictions. But no, you don't fucking do that, do you? So, pardon me and everybody else that watches this documentary and fucking has no sympathy for your brother, considering how you treat the rest of the people that deal with drug addiction. But to get back to the documentary itself, definitely a good watch, because like I said, I lived through this shit. I remember when all of it was happening, but the thing was I wasn't involved in politics and news, and I was younger at the time, right? I just wasn't paying attention. So to watch it again and hear like every story, incident, and everything else, you're just like, oh my god, it really was fucking insane, wasn't it? More so than the late night media made it out to be and everything else. So definitely a good documentary to watch. It's short, sit, watch it, enjoy.